Although he had previously refused to assist me with housing, my father gave my cousin a $50,000 apartment for her wedding. Welcome to Whisper Reddit. Dive into untold stories and hidden secrets. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell. Your next favorite story awaits. I severed all ties with him, but 5 years later, after learning about my wedding, he wanted to get in touch. My name is Sophia, and my childhood was full of the kind of privilege that most people can only imagine. Our home was like something from a magazine, with spacious rooms, a well-kept lawn, and a pool that hosted countless summer parties. My father's business success made it all possible, and he never allowed us to. Even though I was more interested in playing with my cousin Chloe than learning the value of money at that age, I would nod in an attempt to absorb the lesson. Forget it, Sophia honey, remember that everything we have comes from hard work, my dad would say, his voice carrying that familiar mix of pride and authority. Chloe was practically my sister, even though technically she was my cousin just a year younger than me. She was the daughter of my father's younger brother Uncle Mark. Our families were inseparable despite the difference in our lifestyles. When Uncle Mark accepted another check from Dad, Chloe and I would spend hours in my room planning our futures. We would share everything, including clothes, secrets, and dreams. Chloe would say, "We'll go to college together," while lying on my bed and staring at the ceiling. "Your uncle's family needs our support," my mom would explain whenever I noticed Dad helping them out financially. "Family takes care of family," she said. When high school graduation drew near, my father declared that he would cover the cost of both of our college educations. Mom stood next to him, beaming with pride, as he made the announcement at our joint graduation party. He put an arm around each of us, saying, "Both of my girls deserve the best education possible." I remember how Chloe's eyes welled up with tears of gratitude, and I just smiled, taking it for granted. Looking back, I should have recognized the signs, but at the time, I was just grateful to have my cousin's sister. Chloe squealed as we decorated our dorm rooms, which are conveniently across the hall from each other. "Nothing can ever come between us, right Sophia?" "Nothing," I promised, meaning it with all my heart. God, how naive we were, how naive I was. By my side, we were packing our bags for college and were going to take on the world together. We were two peas in a pod, never imagining that a wedding gift would eventually unravel everything we thought we knew about our ideal family. They're perfect only because we decided not to examine the foundation's cracks too closely. College went by more quickly than I had anticipated, and before I knew it, I was crossing the stage to get my diploma while my family cheered. Armed with my degree, I immediately got a job at a marketing firm, and everything seemed to be falling into place well, almost everything, Dad. One evening over dinner, I brought up the topic of getting my own place, and I've been looking at apartment listings online. The rental market is crazy right now, so I was dreaming of having my own place. Sophia interrupted me, putting down his fork, and said, "You're an independent woman now, you have a good job, it's time for you to earn your own living. Your mother and I gave you a great education, but now it's time for you to stand on your own 2 feet," he said. I felt like I'd been slapped, and that's how I ended up in a tiny one-bedroom apartment, watching my savings grow painfully slowly while half my rent took up my paycheck, but I was determined to show that I could manage on my own. A year later, Chloe graduated, and we celebrated at her favorite restaurant. It was then that she broke the news to Jake that he was proposing to her. She squealed and flashed a diamond ring, and the 4 months that followed were filled with wedding preparations. I threw myself into my role as ma of honor, helping Chloe choose everything from her dress to the table settings, despite my own housing difficulties. And everything went flawlessly. The ceremony was lovely, the reception was sophisticated, and I watched Chloe dance with Jake. They were both beaming with joy when my father got up to speak. "Chloe," he started off with a heartfelt voice, "you've been like a daughter to me all these years. Watching you grow up alongside Sophia has been one of life's greatest joys." I grinned while sipping my champagne, but he went on to pull out an envelope, saying, "I want to give you something special, something to start." Uncle Mark and Aunt Sa were crying, and Chloe hurried to embrace my father, sobbing, "Thank you," into his shoulder. He said, "I love you like my own daughter," loud enough for everyone to hear, and I sat there frozen as family members gathered around Chloe and Jake, congratulating them on their incredible gift. My mind was racing about the same father who had told me to stand on my own. "Your new life together." He paused for dramatic effect, giving me the keys to your very own apartment. I waited exactly 3 days after the wedding before I arrived at my parents' house. My hands were shaking as I rang the doorbell, but my voice was steady. When Dad opened the door, I said, "We need to talk," walking past him into the familiar living room where I'd spent so many happy moments. I gripped my champagne glass so tightly that I thought it might break, but I kept smiling and playing my part because this was Chloe's day after all. "What's on your mind, Sophia?" He settled into his favorite armchair, looking perfectly calm as if he hadn't just dropped a bomb on my life. You're going to act as though you don't know that I stayed standing because I was too upset to sit. You told me to work for myself so that I could support myself, but you just gave Chloe an apartment as if it were nothing. Dad sighed as if I was being unreasonable. With Chloe, there are differences between us. We attended the same college and received the same education, which you paid for. By the way, she comes from a poor family, Sophia. Jake's family is poor, and your uncle is unable to help them start their lives. He leaned forward, and at today's prices, they would never be able to save enough money for their own place. I laughed sharply. Oh, and I can half the country rents, Dad. They could have done what I'm doing, work, save, rent an apartment like normal people. You're being mertile. He broke his composed exterior, saying, this isn't about you, this is my money, and I decide how to spend it. I help your uncle's family because they need it. Isn't about money, it's about fairness. How does it feel to see your niece treated better than your own daughter? That's enough. Mom rushed into the room. I didn't even realize she was home. How dare you question your father's decisions? You have no right to tell him how to spend his money. Oh, your husband giving an apartment to another woman's daughter while telling his own to struggle? Don't you take that tone personally, young lady? Mom's face was red with rage. I practically yelled, now you think this is about jealousy? Why? This is about respect, about treating your own child with the same consideration you show to others. Get out. Dad's voice was icy until you could appreciate everything we've done for you and apologize for this behavior. I gladly grabbed my purse and told him not to worry about doing anything else for me because I wouldn't want your charity. My eyes were burning with rage as I got into my car. Wasn't about the money, it was about the double standard of seeing my father go above and beyond for Chloe while telling me to toughen up. In my case, they changed nearly everything. I developed my career, moving up the ranks at my marketing firm to become a senior account manager. I saved money for a down payment in this crazy market, but it was never nearly enough. Most importantly, though, I met Michael, who entered my life during a client meeting. Was our creative director, and something clicked when he proposed on a random Tuesday night while we were having dinner together. I knew I had finally found someone who truly put me first. The wedding planning began right away, with a date set for early summer, and I threw myself into it with the same tenacity I put into everything else in my life. The venue was reserved, the dress was picked, and then came the most difficult part, the guest list. I spent hours at my kitchen table staring at it. Though it wasn't difficult to choose who wouldn't be on it, I hadn't spoken to either Chloe or my parents in 5 years. Not since Chloe's hurtful Facebook message that you're jealous because I have a husband and an apartment while you don't, Sophia. Perhaps if you weren't so entitled, you'd have both by now, but I suppose some people just can't handle seeing others succeed. I blocked her after that, and it was easier that way. I created a new life, surrounded myself with people who valued me, and tried to forget about. Word spreads quickly, even in broken families. I was sitting in my apartment looking over flower arrangements and deciding between roses and peonies when my phone rang. My hand shook and my heart leaped into my throat as I answered Sophia, whose voice sounded older and more exhausted. I heard congratulations were in order, but who told you that my voice sounded steadier than I felt? Does it matter? Why didn't you invite me to your wedding? His voice paused, and I could hear the hurt in it. I'm your father, and I should be the one to walk you down the aisle. Before I could stop it, a bitter laugh came out of my mouth. You want to play the father card, Sophia? I'm curious, but I cut him off because I felt reckless because something in his voice had released all the emotions I'd been keeping in check for 5 years. Will you be giving me an apartment as a wedding gift, like you did for Chloe? The silence on the other end lasted so long that I thought he had hung up. I can give you $5,000 for the wedding, sweetie. That's a generous gift, and you should be grateful for it. After giving Chloe an entire apartment, I felt that old familiar burn of indignation rising in my throat. Some things seemed to have remained the same, so I said, thanks for your generosity, Dad, in a sarcastic voice, but before he could reply, the line died. I stared at my phone, my hands shaking a little, wondering if that 5-year silence had been better than. I never imagined I'd have to write something like this about my own daughter, but Sophia has shown her true colors by demanding an apartment as a wedding gift and threatening to not invite me to her wedding unless I comply. This reminded me of why I had cut contact in the first place. The following morning, I received a notification on my phone that Robert Anderson had shared a post. My father didn't post on social media very often, so seeing his name alone made my stomach knot, and when I opened it, my hand began shaking. My fingers flew across the keyboard before I could stop myself. It's a matter of principle that you gave my cousin an apartment for her wedding, and your own daughter deserves the same consideration. The attitude she's displaying breaks my heart. The comments began to pour in right away. How ungrateful can she be, Cousin James? Some people never appreciate what they have, even people I barely knew were weighing in. Or at least an explanation for the disparity in treatment, but the comments kept coming, each one more critical than the last. My hands were shaking so much that I could hardly type, but something snapped inside me, and I opened a new post and began writing. I started by telling you a story that has been bothering me for years. Chloe's birthday was celebrated with extravagant parties, while mine was celebrated with simple family get-togethers when we traveled overseas. Dad. Chloe's father paid for her education, which I appreciate, and gave her an apartment as a wedding gift while telling me to be independent. At Chloe's wedding, she danced with my father instead of her own father, and the more I consider this, the more suspicious it seems. I wouldn't even be shocked if it turned out that Chloe was actually my father's daughter. I hit post before. My post's aftermath was nuclear within hours, with my phone exploding with calls and messages from every part of the family. Some relatives immediately announced they wouldn't be attending my wedding, and my mother called first, her voice shrill with anger. How could you do that? Your father is devastated. I could second-guess myself as the words stared back at me from the screen. A nuclear bomb dropped into the middle of our family's meticulously maintained facade. Raised you better than this, Dad's call, followed by a barrage of anger and accusations that I was ruining the family name and that you were dead to me. He spat before hanging up. Aunt Sarah's call was especially nasty. You are a vindictive little girl who hissed at you, saying, "How dare you suggest that you're just jealous of my daughter's happiness?" Then Chloe's message arrived, congratulating you on demonstrating what a hysterical paranoid person you've become. I feel bad for your fiancé, who is marrying a delusional woman who makes up horrible stories about her own family. The next 2 months were a blur of wedding preparations, and Michael was my rock through it all, never questioning my decision to cut off my family supporting me as I got married. She can't handle not being the center of attention, so don't worry about blocking me, I'll do it myself. I quietly blocked everyone who had left nasty comments or messages, and my wedding guest list significantly shrank, but I told myself it was for the best that Uncle Mark remained silent throughout the entire ordeal, which I found oddly comforting amid the chaos. I'd never seen my uncle so broken. He sat heavily on my couch with his hands clasped together so tightly that his knuckles were white. He started talking about your father's treatment of Chloe, which made me start to think about everything and remember how he told me about the early years of his marriage, how my father was. Then one rainy evening, Uncle Mark knocked on my door and looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Could he come in?" he asked quietly. "We need to talk?" Always around their house, he drove Sarah home from work by telling her that it wasn't safe for her to take the bus. This was even before she became pregnant with Chloe, and I thought that he was just being a giving brother. Uncle Mark's voice cracked as he reached into his jacket and took out an envelope with shaking hands. I had to know that after the post, the DNA test results were printed on official laboratory letterhead, and my uncle had taken hair samples from all. Uncle Mark's genetic match to Chloe revealed only an 84% uncle relationship, while my father's revealed a 99.99% paternal match. Sarah revealed everything today, whispering that they had been having an affair for 25 years, starting before Chloe was even conceived. We sat there until long after midnight, piecing together memories that suddenly made horrifying sense, the special treatment, the extravagant gifts, and the way my father always seemed to know. They were all three of them. For the first time since this whole nightmare started, I felt no satisfaction in being correct. The morning after Uncle Mark's visit changed everything. I was still processing our conversation when my phone buzzed with a message that said, "I'm so sorry, Sophia." Uncle Mark said as he was leaving, "I should have seen it, should have known." I watched him walk to his car in the rain, his shoulders hunched with the weight of 2 decades of betrayal. Mom Sophia texted me, "Your uncle just left. We need to talk. Can you meet me at Rosemary's Cafe in an hour?" She was sitting in a corner booth, looking like she hadn't slept, and I noticed that her hands were slightly shaking. She said, "I filed for divorce before I even sat down. I just came from the lawyer's office." Her voice cracked after 25 years of marriage, and I never knew. Perhaps Uncle Mark had told her everything, such as the results of the DNA test and Aunt Sarah's confession. I owe you the biggest apology because I defended him and sided with him all these years. I watched him favor Chloe and told myself it was nothing. You should have listened to me and seen what was happening in my own home, Mom. Let me finish. He had filed for divorce because he couldn't continue to be married to a woman who had lived such a profound lie. Sophia's mother reached across the table and grabbed my hands, her eyes brimming with tears. I was at home trying to process everything that had happened when someone started pounding on my door. I opened it to find Dad standing there, his face purple with rage. "Are you happy now?" Mom ordered a bottle of wine, and we shared it as she told me about all the signs she'd ignored over the years, all the moments that suddenly made terrible sense. "You were the only one brave enough to say what we all should have seen, though, and we spent hours in that cafe crying and talking, starting the slow healing process. I was shocked by how composed I was when I said, You've destroyed everything, 2 families destroyed because you couldn't keep your mouth shut. I destroyed nothing. You made a choice 25 years ago that would destroy these families. Well, I won't be at your wedding, how's that for truth? I wasn't planning to invite you. I said quietly, you haven't been a real father to me in years. Then it's settled, he snarled, you're no longer my daughter. His expression of shock was almost comical, but before he could react, I opened the door and motioned for him to leave. When he did, I firmly closed it behind him, leaving him standing in the hallway. That evening, I called Uncle Mark, my hands shaking a little as I dialed his number. Uncle Mark, I have something to ask you. I took a deep breath. Would you walk me down the aisle at my wedding? There was a long pause, and I heard him clear his throat multiple times before he could speak. Sophia, I would be honored. 2 months went by in a blur of wedding preparations. The guest list was smaller than anticipated, but in some way that made it more special because everyone who came stood by me when it would have been easier to look away and chose truth over cozy lies. The garden venue was lovely, with white roses and peonies scattered throughout. Mom sat in the front row, wiping her eyes with a tissue as Uncle Mark took my arm to lead me down, and I noticed tears in his eyes as he spoke. I was writing wedding thank you notes in my rented apartment when Mom came to visit one afternoon and said, I want you to have this. She slid an envelope across my coffee table and said, I don't need this money, what I need is for my daughter to get married. My parents' move happened surprisingly quickly, and Mom later told me that Dad agreed to everything just to get it over with, possibly hoping to minimize the scandal. They settled out of court, and Mom received a $200,000 settlement. I won't pretend I didn't cry when I deposited that check or when Michael and I found the ideal apartment, a gorgeous 3-bedroom apartment with a balcony and enough space to start the family we're hoping for, but she had the house she deserves, so she reached out and squeezed my hand in thoughtful compensation for all the years I failed to stand up for you. You didn't fail, I did, but we're fixing things now, and she laughed. Dad and Aunt Sarah got married last month, and I heard about it through the family grapevine. It seems like they didn't even wait for the ink to dry on their respective divorce papers. They aren't hiding their relationship anymore, as evidenced by the happy couple photos on social media, which make it seem like the past 25 years of deceit never happened. I don't follow their accounts, although I don't need to, because the majority of our relatives supported Mom and me after the DNA results were made public, even those who. Uncle Mark, who was initially defended by Dad because he couldn't ignore the evidence, comes over for dinner every Sunday. He is now tentatively dating again after the betrayal, and his mother joins us frequently. It has been lovely to watch them heal together, sister-in-law and brother-in-law, who are bonded by shared pain. Sometimes late at night, I think about Chloe because she is technically my half-sister. I wonder if she knew or if she ever suspected the truth about our father's favoritism, but those thoughts no longer keep me awake. I now live my own life, own a house, and have a family based on truth rather than lies.